It is obvious the BYU football program is enjoying a ton of success on the football field this fall with an 8-0 record and a top 10 ranking nationally. But is that success on the gridiron also extending off the field? Let's dig into it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. As always, big thank you to all of you who we like to call our everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and get $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And I had a question sent in, and I asked for them on our Locked On Cougars Insider group for a mailbag I wanted to do this week on the podcast. One question stood out above all others, and it came in from one of our longtime listeners, Jenny. And she said, Jake, I don't weigh in a lot, but I wanted to ask you with regards to what BYU's NFL draft prospects look like right now with regards to the success the team is having. It's a great question. She went on to obviously acknowledge that Connor Pay has made it very clear that he fully intends to pursue his NFL opportunities. And she wondered if that has extended to other players when it comes to the BYU football program. Now, the biggest thing to take away from that question for me was, okay, I don't know that answer for that question. You know who I can ask? People who actually know the answer. And that is people I know that work in NFL circles. So I threw out some text messages to people I know who are far more in the know when it comes to stuff like that. And the response I got was actually quite positive. I'll just say that overall. One quote that was sent to me, and it says this: with a highly ranked Power 4 team, guys, tryout guys who would probably get a mini camp invite become good free agents. Free agents become late round picks become mid round picks, etc. Scouts value the success and the level of consistent competition of what a program like BYU is doing right now. That's a really cool thing to hear because based on the list I got back for BYU with regards to NFL draft prospects, both offensive tackles right now, Caleb Etienne as well as Brayden Keim, have elite size and length, and that's obviously of interest to NFL teams. But the success they're having and the fact that they have probably been the two most consistent performers for BYU on their offensive line, it's a resurgent year for that offensive front. That's helping them out. Also mentioned guys like Chase Roberts, Darius Lassiter. I think both of them very easily you see potential NFL futures in their own eyes. John Nelson, Tyler Batty, and also potentially Blake Mangelson from the defensive line. I would have told you coming into the season, and I asked one for a follow-up on that defensive line. I said, okay, before the season, was it really only Batty who was getting any type of attention? I said, yeah, essentially Tyler Batty was the only guy. But the biggest thing, as they mentioned, is the success that BYU is having on the football field, and more particularly, the success the BYU defensive line is having. That is helping guys like a John Nelson as well as a Blake Mangelson get more interest from NFL scouts. The other name I mentioned in this was Connor Pay's name, as well as a couple of the linebackers, but they may be a little further down the road, Jack Kelly, Isaiah Glasker, because those two still have eligibility remaining and could decide to remain in school for another year if they decide not to come out for the NFL draft. But that's a bigger list than I would have anticipated getting back from the people I've talked to about BYU's NFL draft prospects. But once again, it's because of the success that BYU is having on the field. The NFL teams are sitting up a little more straight and saying, all right, what's going on in Provo, Utah? What do we need to know? And I can tell you from my own observations, there has been a major uptick in NFL scouts from across the league making the trek to Provo, whether it's to BYU games, practices, or anything of the like. They are out there and they're trying to get intel on all these guys that BYU has got potentially available in the upcoming draft. I'm not saying right now that every one of those guys is going to be drafted. And quite frankly, if half of the guys I listed get drafted, I will consider it an ultra successful year for BYU in the NFL draft. Because remember, the last, I'd say conservatively 25-ish years, going back to the turn of the century, it's been a pretty light season, pretty light run for BYU when it comes to NFL draft prospects. One, maybe two, three guys really kind of make a big draft class for BYU, and we know that is a drop in the bucket for some other programs out there in the world. But the hope is that Kalani Sitake, and it's one of his stated goals, he has made it very clear in the past that he wants guys to live their dreams when it comes to playing football. And part of that is every one of these guys. I can tell you growing up, I had aspirations to be an NFL tight end. Well, guess what? My dream died really early on in high school. The hope is that all these guys at BYU that have those similar aspirations, whatever they may be, with regards to the professional careers, they get the opportunity to pursue those. Will it work out for those guys? Well, the relative length of an NFL career is somewhere in the 2 to 3 year range. So it doesn't last very long. They call it the not for long league. Well, it's absolutely true. You are considered to be a commodity when it comes to these NFL teams. They're wheeling and dealing guys and moving them in and out of their team rosters. And if you're not one of the top tier athletes at your position, well, guess what? You're going to be prone to being moved, if not outright cut, and the dream is just over just like that. So I don't mean to put a downer note on the BYU NFL draft prospects, because quite frankly, that list, it's extensive, it's long, and I'm pleased to hear that BYU is getting an uptick in interest with regards to the NFL. That shows you that the success that you have on the football field as a football program, it extends to all facets of the program. BYU recruiting, I'm sure, is seeing an uptick. And now we're going to talk about a guy who actually backed away from a commitment to the BYU football program in just a moment. But they're seeing increased interest on the recruiting front. There are probably young men and parents out there in the world who have seen BYU play and see that the fact that they're ranked 9th in the country, they're 8-0, and they're from across the country, and they don't know much about BYU, but the parents are saying, hey, maybe we should look at that university and see what it's all about. And that is the brand power that BYU has, and especially when they're winning at the level they're winning at right now, it doubles, if not triples, it feels like, the reach of what BYU is, and it gets more people paying a little more attention and maybe garnering some extra interest from the BYU Cougars. And that is a side benefit that comes directly from the fact you have success on the football field. The hope is you can capitalize on this. Send a bunch of guys to the NFL and prove that they can continue to play at a high level in the NFL ranks. BYU's got a good track record of late of sending good athletes to the NFL ranks. Hopefully this next crop can live up to that legacy that BYU's left. But then also you turn right around, hit the recruiting trail, and trying to find the best talent you can out there, whether it's high school ranks, junior college, transfer portal, or any other method of adding talent to your roster. You go out there and essentially tell people, we're BYU and we want you to be a part of our program and help us go to even a higher level than we're already at right now. And that can be a compelling pitch at this point for the BYU football program. And I hope they lean hard into that, because it can become a self-feeding machine if done right. And the hope is that BYU can start to generate that extra interest and parlay it into success off the field, in addition to the success, obviously, on the gridiron. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk a little bit more about BYU and recruiting. They lost a recruit from Southern California. Is that like a major blow to BYU? Why in the world would the IB decommitting at this point? We'll try and make heads and tails of that, and exactly also where BYU recruiting stands at the current juncture, and we'll delve into that momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you out to the sporting events you want to go to, whether it's NBA, Major League Baseball playoffs, the World Series ongoing, only one game left potentially, but nonetheless, if you're college football junkie, college hoops, whatever you're into, sporting-wise, they got that for you. If you're not into sports and you want to buy other tickets, well, they've also got that for you. You can go to comedy shows, music concerts, theater events, all available from our friends at Game Time. The best part is they have a brand new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting the tickets to see your favorite teams and or other events easier than ever. It filters out all the fluff, giving you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to spend time wasting your time looking over thousands of other tickets. The best part about our friends over at Game Time is I love the fact that they have a seat view, so you know exactly what you're expecting when you show up to the game. And also the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those tickets. So download the Game Time app today and take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with our friends at Game game time picks. All you got to do is create an account on the app, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Hope you all are doing fantastic out there. Now, I had another question sent in this week. Actually, there's about 3 of them that related to different recruiting points. But the biggest thing I wanted to talk about was a decommitment from the BYU football program. And a couple of you asked me about this, saying, Jake, what in the world's going on with Cole Cogshell? Now, if you know the name Cole Cogshell, you are a recruit, Nick, unlike many of our listeners, because I don't think a ton of you out there, maybe I'm wrong about this, and feel free to give me feedback if I am wrong about this, don't necessarily pay as close to as close attention to the recruiting front for BYU, simply due to the fact that a lot of guys come to this program, go on missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and when you're tracking them in high school, all of a sudden they disappear off your proverbial radar for the next 2 years and change, and then pop right back up. And that can be tough, obviously, to track and stay with. But BYU is trying, I can assure you, they are absolutely intent on parlaying the success they're having this season on the gridiron into recruiting efforts off the field. But why in the world does Cole Cogshell, a defensive end prospect from Southern California, decommit from BYU? He made that announcement earlier this week in his statement on his social media feeds. It said, first off, I want to thank Coach Papinga, Coach Guilford, and Coach Sitake and the coaching staff for believing in me and giving me an opportunity to play at the next level. I also want to thank the Cougar family for welcoming me with open arms. After talking it over with my family and praying about it, I want to say I will be decommitting from BYU and will be opening my recruitment, unquote. Now, I'm not 100% surprised by this, because if you watched how things went down with regards to his recruiting feed or his social media feed, is he announced that decommitment, and we're talking, I don't even feel like it was 5 minutes later, all of a sudden, he announces, after a great conversation with UCLA, I'm blessed to say I've received an offer from the Bruins. Props to him. This is a kid. He goes to high school at John Muir High School, which is in Pasadena, California. What else is in Pasadena, California, Jake? Oh, good question. That would be the Rose Bowl. Now, it may not be that he ultimately picks UCLA, but I think that the interest from one of his hometown, if not his outright hometown team, may have flipped the scales, and he's decided, you know what, maybe I want to play a little closer to home with regards to my future in college football. I don't know the exact reason for Cole Cogshell, from John Muir High School, announcing his decommitment, but it's a bit of a surprise, because I'll be frank, I never expected a guy amidst the success that BYU's having right now to decommit. I would have expected more guys to be committing to BYU football, but every player has to find the right spot for them. Kalani has talked about it multiple times with regards to the transfer portal. If it's not working out at BYU for a young man, he is going to do his absolute darndest to let them find the best spot for them, where they can blossom and enjoy their playing career. He knows how finite this period of life is for these athletes, and they're trying to maximize any and all potential that they have, whether it's NIL, their skill as a football player, and maybe some of them, it's just a simple joy of being able to play and say they played for a college football program. In many cases, BYU in this circumstance. And that obviously can make a big change and a big impression on a young man's life. Well, I also respect guys like Cole Cogshell who back off of a commitment when they feel like maybe it's not in their best interest and they need to look elsewhere. And I wish him the best in whatever's next. It's not out of the realm of possibility he comes back around and commits to BYU, because he's got good size. He's a 3-star edge player, 6'3", 240 pounds. Those are the type of guys BYU needs to bring a pass rush to this football program. But as it stands right now, Cole is going to be looking elsewhere beyond BYU. And a couple of you also asked a follow-up question in our mailbag, saying, Jake, what's the latest with regards to recruiting? What are you hearing? I am hearing that BYU is making any and all efforts they can make out there on the recruiting front. I asked Kalani earlier this week about recruiting, and he said that they're not going to send the coaches out on the road like they did the first bye week, because they said they used a lot of their visits that they are allotted during the season during that week. This week was, he said, more of an opportunity to go out to playoff games here locally in the state of Utah and love up their recruits locally. BYU will always make Utah their home base when it comes to recruiting athletes. And the nice part is, Utah per capita is pumping out more Division I talent than many of its compatriots in terms of relative size, population-wise for a state. We're just north of 3.5 million people, but you'd be hard-pressed to say that BYU's not putting out their fair share of athletes. Now, are the Cougars also going to be able to pull off every single recruiting win? Absolutely not. That's just a simple fact of life that you're not going to be able to win every battle that you are in when it comes to recruiting. But if you win more often than you don't, well, guess what? You're going to have some pretty good talent in the program, and it should benefit you with regards to getting better guys into the program and having better athletes, aka improved depth, and then ultimately better play on the football field with better overall athletes. It's been a years long process for BYU to build up to the level they're at right now. I still don't think it's a finished product. There are still weaknesses I see roster wise for BYU in terms of just the overall depth. I think the defensive line in particular, it's quite thin. Honestly, I feel like beyond their frontline guys, particularly at defensive tackle. But the good news is the pieces on each one of these recruiting groups for BYU have skill in them. And the hope is that these incoming recruits, I should say, not newcoming, but incoming recruits will be able to bolster that depth and raise it to another level for the BYU football program. We'll see how it all goes. It's an inexact science. The star ratings, the overall evaluation of guys when it comes to the camp series where they're not actually wearing pads and then trying to evaluate them when they're in season, it's completely inexact, but I do believe that we are getting better about projecting which guys are going to be those difference makers out there in the football world, whereas others might be middling prospects that you're going to have to polish a little bit, draw that diamond out from the coal that they are, and hopefully it pays off for you down the line. The only other issue with that is with NIL, bigger programs are more than happy to watch you develop a player and then try and swoop in and say, hey, young man, we'd like you to come play for X big name university here, and we'll pay you X gazillion dollars, it feels like. Now, gazillion is relative because it's still small potatoes with regards to top end contracts in the NFL and what college athletes can make in NIL. But we're talking potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on how good of a player these athletes are. And that's life-changing money in and of itself. And I think a lot of athletes out there are thinking, okay, where do I need to best position myself to make that leap? Could I go to the G5 school, blow up, and then a Power 5 school says, yeah, hey, we'll pay you when you come up here and play for this? Could you be a star at another Power 4 level program and expect that one of the bigger fish, as it were, in the college football realm would come and say, hey, we see your talent, we want you to come play for us, and we'll pay you more money than you're making right now. That's going to be a conversation we're going to have forever because the genie is out of the bottle and there's no way you're putting it back with regards to NIL and, for lack of a better term, pay for play. I know it's supposed to be sponsorship deals. I know the whole idea of name, image, and likeness agreements were to publicize an athlete and leverage their fame to help them financially. But let's also be very blunt. It's pay for play. If you're playing good enough, other programs want you, and they will be paying a significant amount of money, if not an outright just ridiculous sum, to get you to their university, and good luck to you. BYU, though, just I'll add this, and I don't think it's revolutionary in saying this, is the BYU does not want guys who are simply in Provo for a paycheck. It is a crazy experience to deal with the honor code, the academics around BYU, just the unique culture that Provo has. It's hard enough to deal with that if you're just in it for a paycheck. And I think Kalani's got it right when he's trying to find guys who it means more to them just to play for a program like BYU, where it's a program that's predicated on faith and going out there and doing hard work and developing talent and having it pay off down the line. They're not in it for quick payoffs. That's just not BYU style, nor will it ever be, I feel like. But we're also, let's be real, there is a pay-for-play element with regards to BYU athletics. If you're a top-end quarterback like Jake Retzlaff, guess what? Even at BYU, you're going to command a significant amount of NIL resources. And when you add in the fact that the NCAA is going to add revenue sharing as soon as next summer, we're upwards of $23 million from the university itself is going to be shared with these athletes. Yeah, guess what? Welcome to the new era of the mini NFL. You're going to have a salary cap of, let's say, 20, 21, 22 million. And how do you dole that out? How much is your left tackle worth in your book? How much is edge rushers? How much is a quarterback? That is all conversations that are going to be had in coming days, months, and it's probably already happened. And it's going to be an even crazier time than it already is, considering now the schools themselves will be paying these athletes and rewarding them handsomely financially to play for their football programs. It's a crazy time. It's an ever-changing time. And frankly, I do not envy a lot of the people who are going to have to deal with this with regards to telling guys, hey, we think you're worth this amount of money. Like, well, I'm worth this. Welcome to free agency and negotiating contracts. It's going to bear watching because it's going to be an interesting evolution of the sport we all know and love. All right, coming up here in just a little bit, we'll wrap up the next, I wrap up this edition, not the next edition, this edition of Locked On Cougars with more questions. I've gotten to like 3 of the questions that were submitted. I will see how many more we can fit in our time remaining right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. If you have not done so already and would like to ask questions on this podcast, well, you got to be a member of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Well, what is the Locked On Cougars Insider Group? It is our group of passing along information, my information of what I've gleaned from BYU sports, whether it's insider notes, status updates of players, all that type of stuff. And it comes to your phone in the form of a text message. You can have one-on-one conversations with me via text message as part of the service. And the best part is you get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you and just pay $5 a month beyond that. Supports the show, gives you that insider access you crave, and hopefully many more of you be joining us here on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, let's get to as many questions as we can in the time remaining. It says, Tyson, how can BYU keep the underdog mentality going through the last 4 games of the regular season? Manufacture it. There are still a lot of doubters out there when it comes to BYU football. And even if they all come around and they start singing BYU's praises, you manufacture. You find some slight. Maybe a player said something out of line with regards to the other team, and you think it's just enough to give you an edge. Do that. I think the other thing is the fact that BYU's been an underdog so heavily this season is that I think it's easy for them to channel that emotion and say, you know what, let's just continue to go out and prove people wrong. And maybe they don't need the overall negative attention to give them an underdog mentality. Maybe they already have it in them and they can just channel that a little bit more. Let's see here. Other questions that came in. I've heard, Byron, a good one here. I want to watch the basketball scrimmage tonight, but I live out of state. I understand it's not being televised on a TV or streamed on BYU or ESPN Plus because Kevin Young doesn't want it televised. I will love an explanation why. Well, frankly, Kevin Young does not want his playbook out there in the open quite yet. Now, it'll be open next week, and I also think that he's hurting the hype around this program by not putting this on streaming or a TV. But it's very much a way that he is trying to protect his program for as long as possible. That's why the blue and white game was not televised on TV. But I just don't get a week away from starting the season when all of a sudden your playbook, as it were, and your athletes and your rotations, they're all going to be on tape less than a week away. Why couldn't you put this one on TV? So I don't have a good explanation for you, Byron, other than what you already said. He just wants an advantage in terms of keeping things away from his opponents, even though in less than a week's time, that's absolutely is going to be something they change. All right. A couple of things here as well, questions-wise about Jay Hill. I like this. I've heard Jay Hill is great at making crucial second-half adjustments to the defense. Can you walk us through what those adjustments typically look like, and could you share some specific examples? That comes from Tanner. It's a good question, Tanner. I would say you can look in particular, look at what BYU did against Oklahoma State. Now, there was a lot of failures on the defense against Oklahoma State, but watch how they changed their alignments. They went from 3-man alignment to a 4-man alignment and then actually morphed back out of it into a 3-man alignment, trying to find the right options for them in that game. And like I said, it was probably their worst game of the season, speaking of it defensively, but you can see the adjustments in terms of the tactics of how BYU wanted to attack Oklahoma State with a scheme that they had implemented over their bye week that BYU was not necessarily ready for. I also look back at what BYU did against SMU, for example. They started the game with Preston Stone, then rotated in Kevin Jennings at quarterback, speaking of the Mustangs. Well, they continue to rotate it, and BYU, if you go back and watch that game, watch the series BYU plays against Preston Stone, watch the series they play against Kevin Jennings, and look how different BYU approaches defending those two quarterbacks. Kevin Jennings is an elite runner, and he's absolutely a dual threat. Preston Stone can run, but he's more of a pocket passer type who's going to stay in the pocket and try to make a play with his arm. BYU morphed that to attack that, and obviously it had wild success, holding SMU to just 15 points in that game. And that remains an absolutely incredible win for BYU on the resume. It's the only loss that SMU has absorbed this season, and it only gets better and better for BYU rep-wise to watch SMU doing their thing, no matter how annoying some of their SMU fans may be on social media. But that's beside the point. Other things. Another one from Tanner here. I've heard that BYU has a substantial amount of NIL funding compared to other schools. What's the reason behind this? Does BYU alumni simply have more wealth? Well, here's the thing. You got to have wealthy donors who are inclined or motivated to be a part of NIL. There are some out there who have infinite amounts of wealth, as it were, but just simply are like, you know what? That's not for me. And I can understand that. That's just, if you're not into it, you can just opt to do other things with your money. But for those that are into it, it's a major opportunity to watch you do your thing. We have seen the story from on3.com about AJ DeBonsa being able to be paid potentially $4.5 million by the BYU basketball program. And a big part of it is due to what Ryan Smith and Danny Ainge want to see BYU evolve into as a basketball program. That's cool to have guys like that on the back end, but Ryan Smith is just one donor. It's no surprise that BYU has got a bevy of other donors out there who have got ultra deep pocketbooks, maybe not to the billionaire level that Ryan Smith does, but I do know that there are other high-powered boosters who've got a lot of money, who want nothing more than to see BYU succeed on the field, hardwood, whatever surface the team that they're interested in plays on, they're investing in it. And BYU, to their credit, has been accepting those investments and being able to earmark them for whatever they're being done. I think the era of BYU saying, well, you donate to us and it goes into the general fund and we'll do with it as we see fit, I think that's dead. I can't say that directly because I don't have direct knowledge of that. But NIL, they absolutely have a war chest and they're going to utilize it. They're going to absolutely try and chase down as many top-tier athletes as they can get. And for you as a Cougar fan, that should be an exciting proposition for you guys. Other questions here. I have heard, I already read that one from Tanner. I know this does not matter to the team, but let's say we win the Big 12 Conference Championship and make the college football playoff as a 4 seed. What are our chances of winning it all? What are our odds of being teams from the Big 10 or SEC? And is this really a team of destiny, as Sitake says, manifested? That comes from Porter. Yet a top 4 seed would make you infinitely easier for BYU to make a run towards a national title because the fact is you have to win 3 games to win a title versus 4. BYU can compete with certain teams in the Big 10 and SEC, and that's why you line up and play these games. Those teams may have an off day that day, and you go out there and win that game. Doesn't matter that they had an off day in the end. You won the football game. To the victor go the spoils, and that's exactly what BYU could do. It would be awesome, I think, for BYU simply to make the college football playoff. Even as maybe the second place team in the league, should they stumble down the stretch here and lose a game or two, I think getting into the playoff alone would be just the absolute crown jewel of an otherwise spectacular season for BYU football. And if you win in the playoff, man, I'd be extremely, extremely impressed. BYU is a good team, and they have manufactured ways and found ways to win games. Ryan McGee said it on the ESPN Daily podcast I heard yesterday about BYU. He says, this is a team that just finds ways to win football games. And he said that is something you absolutely can have in your back pocket when it comes to going up against better teams down the stretch, and especially when it comes to the postseason. And I just look at it and say, you know what? BYU knows how to win football games. I said it yesterday on the podcast. Winning is a skill. It absolutely is. And BYU should lean more into that. Let's see. I've got time probably for one more question. And I apologize. I'm not going to get to all of these today because there's some really good ones still in here. But okay, here's a good one right here. We'll wrap up with this. Cameron Jackson, what is your prediction for the last stretch of games this season? Said, I vowed to get a tattoo of the national championship if we win it this season. How likely do you think I'm going to a tattoo parlor in late January? Cameron, I'm going to say you're safe to the tune of 15%. I've got 15% confidence BYU can make a run to the national title. There were some really, really good teams out there that BYU'd have to beat. But once again, I said it, BYU finds ways to win football games. And so long as they keep winning, there's no reason to think they can't win their way all the way through, because until they're proven otherwise, I think they're going to do some really, really good things. What's my prediction for the last stretch of games this season? There's 4 games to go. And I said it yesterday on the podcast. I think the 3 games, Utah, Kansas, Arizona State, that's a pretty tough trio relative to what BYU has faced this year, just because of the nature of these teams. They're plucky teams. Kansas is ultra dangerous, despite the fact that they just can't win a football game. Utah, it's your arch rival. I've got a thought that if BYU is going to drop a game, it probably comes against Kansas or Utah. And the problem is, you drop one of those, does it spiral and you let down the following week, whether that's losing at Utah, then losing to Kansas, or losing to Kansas and then dropping one to Arizona State. My prediction right now for BYU is they go 3-1 down the stretch. I hope that they can move past a potential loss and not allow it to affect them, but that is the concern you've got to have when it comes to BYU football down the stretch here. 11-1 gets you to Arlington still and playing in the conference title game, but I'm greedy. Give me 12-0. I'd love to see a 4-0 run, but if you want my prediction, I'm saying 3-1 down the stretch, and BYU still punches their ticket to the Big 12 title game. All right, that's going to do it. A big thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast. As always, thank you once again for making it your first listen of the day. As always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers as well, right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.